before the panel and then the closing of the conference and the prizes and all that we're going to give. So before the last session, we're going to have Ruby Gain, who is going to talk about something that is super relevant in the last, 3-4 years? I mean, it has been always relevant, but it's now becoming more important because finally laws are paying attention to this. So if you haven't gotten started into this topic, I think it's a great opportunity to pay attention to this talk. So please help me welcome Ruby to the stage. Welcome. Thank you. Thank you for being here.
Thank you. So, yeah, hola a todos. Muchas gracias por venir aquí. Me llamo Ruby. Voy a intentar hablar en español un poquito, ¿vale? Porque es mi primera vez aquí en Selenium Conf y estoy muy feliz de estar aquí. Soy de Filipinas, pero vivo en Noruega casi muchos años ya. La verdad es que todavía me casi, ¿cómo se dice? Me cuesta adaptarme en dos mundos, de Noruega y Filipinas. Porque, por ejemplo, en Noruega, si estás por ejemplo, en ascensor, ¿cómo se dice? Lo normal es que la gente, que los dos miráis al suelo y, excuse me for my Spanish, okay? En completo silencio. Pero aquí, por ejemplo, la semana pasada en ascensor, cuando una señora ¿cómo se dice? Me dice hola, me da un infarto porque tuve que recordarme que, ya, claro que sí, ya estoy en Noruega, estoy aquí en España. So, vale. Bueno, cambiando un poco de tema ahora, mi charla es cómo se llama Inclusive by Default. Voy a continuar en inglés, ¿vale? My talk is called Inclusive by Default. So, basically, how we can integrate accessibility checks into our Selenium tests that we already trust. So, but I have a confession to make. Okay, I would say for a long time, I've been coding blindly. Okay, so let me explain that a little bit. So I started working as a front-end developer in the Philippines, and then moved to Norway right before the COVID lockdown. And like most developers, I was just, trying to make the test code run, smoothly, and, writing tests, and hoping that, the next person will not, try to kill me or make a mess out of it. But that changed when a very close friend of mine, started using a screen reader. So basically, I watched him struggle to fill a simple contact form on a government website, and he could not get past the second field because there's no proper inputs in the labels. And I would say that was the moment that it clicked for me. Because I was not intentionally excluding people, but I was still excluding them in that sense. So of course I knew about semantic HTML, the ARIA labels and all this stuff, and even the accessibility practices. But those are, in my case, at least those were just theoretical knowledge. It's like a someday pile. For example, in a daily workflow. And that is a pattern that I want to break today. So I'm going to show you some practical ways to catch a meaningful number of accessibility issues while you're running your Selenium test that you already trust. So basically, there's no new framework, no new separate audit process, and there's no even additional budget conversation. So basically, same browser, same session, and the same page state, and with just one extra call. So what is accessibility debt? So it is just technical debt. And earlier in the talk, I even took a photo of this definition of a technical debt, which says that it's hidden, it's complex, and expensive to resolve later. But with accessibility debt, you would say it also comes with a real human user cost. And in some cases now, there is the legal or the business cost too. So we already know this principle, right? As engineers, so the earlier we catch a problem, the cheaper it is to fix. And then the later you leave it, the more painful and expensive it gets. So basically, yes, accessibility works the same way. So if you keep treating it like something that we will circle back on later, then we're choosing basically the hardest and the most expensive moment to care about it. And of course, by the time it becomes urgent, somebody has been blocked already. And of course, like what been said earlier, this is one of the reasons that this is timing matters now, because accessibility is not just a quality conversation anymore, especially here in Europe. It's also becoming a compliance conversation and a business risk conversation. And honestly, a wake-up call for many teams pushing this aside for too long. So basically, so somebody here was not moved by empathy or earlier, or they may be soon moved by deadlines, customer expectations, and or legal pressure. So either way, so the window for treating this issue as a later is getting smaller. So here's the anti-pattern in one picture that I want to illustrate. So basically, you're already running a daily functional testing bus, let's say. So we spin up a second expensive accessibility bus at audit time. Then, for example, quarterly or biannually or even yearly, depending on your organization. So basically, 2 workflows, 2 bosses, and 2 budgets. But my question is, what if we stop running 2 buses and add just one more rider to the bus that we already do when we commit? So this was my personal little light bulb moment. So Selenium already opens the browser, right? And then logs the user, then waits for the page, and then gets me to the exact state that I care about. That is the expensive part that already done, okay? So at that point, I would say the question would become, why am I not just checking also the accessibility while I'm already here, right? So why am I not using the same browser, the same session, and basically the same page state to run a quick check on, I would say, just for at least for the most common blockers. So, for example, this is a pattern that many teams I've seen, or at least in our organizations, we still live with before. So you run one test to check that feature works, for example, and then accessibility lives somewhere else. A separate audit, maybe a different backlog, or even a report that nobody really cares about. The issue is that the functional test is working, yes. The functional test is not wrong, okay? The issue is it is incomplete. So it just tells me, yes, the login worked. It tells me that, but it tells me whether nothing about whether the experience was actually usable for everyone. So this is my shift, or this is a shift, okay? So for example, in the first slide, accessibility is outside the delivery workflow. But in this particular, in this slide, accessibility is the same quality check. So I keep the Selenium test, and I just add one call. For example, the check accessibility. So I'm not creating a second workflow. I'm not opening a second browser. I'm just rebuilding a page. I'm not rebuilding also a page state somewhere else. I'm just checking accessibility while I'm already here. So same browser, same session, and same page state. So in the old version, I only verify that the form submits. In this version, I add one accessibility check at the same same point in the flow. So the same task can catch issues like contrast violations or missing labels from before it continues. Okay, why start with these blockers? The good news is that, of course, we do not have to start or the entire universe of the WCAG. Because, of course, if you start doing that, the team will just, maybe just shut down. So based on the WebAce 2026 data, so these are the more realistic starting point. For example, the same few high-impact problems that we can have is like the low contrast text, the missing alt text, missing labels, empty links, and empty bottom. So these are the top 5. And then, of course, we leave the judgment-heavy checks, like the alt text quality, to human review. So that way, we can build momentum without overwhelming the team. So what automation can cache and what it can't. So before anybody thinks that I'm saying automation can replace, for example, empathy or common sense or even real user testing. Of course not. I'm going to be honest about that. So automation is great for the objective stuff. For example, is there a label? Is the contrast failing? Or does this button have a name? But that's great. But can it really tell you if the alt text is meaningful or whether the whole experience is confusing or not, or just plain bad? No. Well, that is still, of course, human territory. So the point is not to replace accessibility work. What it can do very well is you can catch the obvious objective blockers, like what I said, the missing labels, the missing names, empty buttons. And that matters because basically it frees up the human link or the human part of doing the review. For example, for the more nuanced things that automation cannot catch. Before we start breaking things, I want to ground this an actual user experience because a mouse user, of course, a keyboard user, and a screen reader user are not moving through the page in the same way. So basically, if the visual layer says one thing, but the semantic layer says another, then somebody gets blocked. And the rest of us might never even notice it. So before I hit on the video demo later, look at this contact form. You notice anything? Well, basically, you can see that white text on yellow. So yeah, it's not, can you read that maybe if you squint. So that is just a screenshot when I play the demo, a recording later. You notice that when the user is tabbing through the form also, or the field, you can see there is no focus ring. So this outline has been explicitly removed by CSS. So that is what the test is about to catch. So look at this real failure. So for example, this is a normal Selenium flow running against a broken contact page. Is it playing? Yeah. So when the test reaches the right page state and the contrast check catches a white on yellow button, so the ratio is a 1.0 or 1.07 to 1 ratio. So before the page ever gets this pipeline, so this is the kind of blocker that you want to catch while the test is already here. So not two sprints later. It is when somebody audits the page. Now with the same task flow or same test, the same environment, and with a small fix. So we improve the contrast to meet the WCAG contrast and also addresses the other common failures, for example, as the focus of visibility and the proper label association for the attributes, and then we run it again. So this time, accessibility passes, and the functional flow continues, and then we get the clean green build. So this is the feedback loop that the team actually wants. So yeah, under the hood, two functions split the work. Okay, so the first function, it runs the JavaScript inside the same live browser session using the execute script. And then basically the second function is what the test actually calls. So it consumes those results and raises a clear assertion only when something fails. And when it fails, so we get this useful diagnostic element tag, like visible text, the measured ratio, and the required threshold. So basically, this is not a separate scanner running later. So this is the same Selenium flow in the same browser and this page state with just one extra check. So this next category is trickier because it is not always obvious visually. And honestly, this is where a lot of us get fooled. So an icon-only control can look perfectly fine on screen, but if it has no real accessible name, so the assistive tech or a screen reader is basically left guessing. So again, before I hit the demo, so look at this page. So you can see there is a heading. There is a text that says, click the button below to log in, right? And there is a nice, although a little bit blurry, a nice blue button. So for the visually the connection feels obvious. But basically that paragraph is not the button's label. It is just a nearby text. So for a screen reader navigating this page, for a user navigating by controls, the control jumps basically from straight to the bottom, right? So and the button itself has only one icon. And there's no ARIA label, and there's no programmatic name. So for the screen reader, what gets announced is just basically a generic unlabeled button. So the visual text that makes this obvious to you, for example, it's not obvious to the one who are impaired or with low vision disability. So the paragraphs and text, and just remember that paragraph text and the buttons are strangers to each other in the accessibility tree. So for the sighted user, for example, you can see, click the button below to log in, and the blue icon right below it. And we can see that, it makes sense. But for a screen reader, it doesn't work that way. So when a screen reader user navigates by interactive elements, which is the extremely common way, they jump straight to the button. And at that point, the screen reader only looks at what the button itself contains. Okay, let's watch what happens when the accessibility check runs. So here, the check failed on accessible names. So here's what's actually doing. So that button is a real, let's say, button element. It is in the DOM, and it received focus. And you can click it. But it contains only an icon. No text, no area label, and nothing. So like what I said, so when a screen reader lands on it, it just says button. That's it. And the user has no idea if it's login, delete, submit, or send. So this is what the missing accessible name actually means in practice. And that is exactly the kind of quiet failure that basically the visual testing alone will never catch. And this is where the team saves time. So basically, we don't just get a vague alley failed message. We get the precise artifact and the exact element, the exact issue that so that we can fix it right away, at least quickly. So in this case, for example, the report points to the icon button and flags a missing accessible name. So instead of like doing scavenger hunt on what's going on, the developer gets a direct fix path. So basically, the goal here is not just to fail the build, but the goal is to fail with enough diagnostic and with detail so that the team can easily fix it and move on fast. Now, for the semantic fix in this section, for example, we added the area label, for example, start login. So we have here the same control, same task, but different outcome. So here, in this case, the check passes, and the click continues. And the experience now works for more users. So again, under the hood, for example, the same pattern as the contrast helper. So two functions split the work. You have, but this case, you have the check accessible names that runs on the JavaScript inside the same Selenium browser session. And it scans the interactive elements. So basically, for each element, it resolves a programmatic naming in order. For example, the area labeled by, the area label, and associated label for. So, for example, the element text, the alt text, then input where it's relevant. And then we put there the assert all interactive element name. This is what the test calls it. So, for example, if any name is missing, it can raise a clear assertion with a failing element snippet. So again, this is not a magic. This is not a separate late stage process. Basically, it is a consistent inflow check that catches the silent semantic failures early. So some questions I get a lot in our team is, what powers this? So, for example, in this demo, I'm using Selenium Python plus just plain browser JavaScript. So basically, the Python drives the flow and then execute the script, and then execute script runs a DOM, and then checks the same browser session, and then returns the structured results. And of course, this pattern is portable. If your team uses Java, C#, or Java, even JavaScript Selenium, that's okay. Only the wrapper changes. So you can start lightweight, and then just layer on the broader tools like your Axcore or Lighthouse or as needed. So in practice, many teams use both for fast custom helper checks in PRs, and then broader sweeps on a nightly run. So, of course, this only works really at scale if it lives in the pipeline, not just one on the engineer's laptop. So this is just an example of a accessibility YAML of a guardrail pattern so that we're using. So like I said, the goal here is not to just turn every pull request into a full accessibility audit. The goal here is to have a fast guardrail that can do a quick critical checks on PRs. So this is useful for reports for fixes and the broader sweeps on, like what I said, on nightly runs. But this is where the teams need a little bit strategy and I would say a little self-control. So because if you switch everything on at once, you will get a wall of red, of course, and everyone will panic. So yeah, we shouldn't do that. Basically, we just start with narrow smoke suite, and then the enforceable, and then put objective blockers on PR. And then automate the blockers. So like missing names, labels, empty buttons, links, and contrast failures. So, and then we leave the broader and more judgment-heavy issues in report mode or manual review until the team is basically ready or ready to expand. And yeah, and then of course, still manually review or escalate the new ones. This is just a sample of the adoption roadmap that I have seen being adopted. But it can be a tweak, of course, depending on your team's preference. But the point is, do something small, enough that you will actually keep doing it. For example, week 1, just pick one real flow. And then week 2, add 1 or 2 helper checks. And then let's say week 3, you can run them in CI, but just in warning mode. And then week 4, you can do is like start blocking only new regressions. So based on experience, this more realistic and survivable for the team. And that is how the kind of practice that actually sticks. Another question that I get, what tools that should we use? So my honest answer is there is no single winner, of course. So, but basically for fast PR guardrails, we focus on the real user flows that we already automate. And then for broader coverage, we just layer in tools like Axcore or Ali, and then sweeps, and then use the Lighthouse for high-level diagnostics. And then again, I just want to reiterate that keep the human review for the new ones or that automation cannot judge. So of course, it's just a slide, it's just a map, not a mandate. And yeah, basically just pick the right layer for the job. So I keep saying the same, seeing the same pattern, 4 patterns. For example, teams turn on everything at once and scan the wrong UI state and then fail with vague messages. And also, although also they suppress too broadly, and of course, and then after that they never come back. They get a bit burned. So when that happens, the signal quality drops and people stop trusting the checks. So basically what works is start with a small blocker suite, and then you scan the exact tested state, and then return the actionable diagnostics. And then keep suppressions narrow and temporary. So for my key takeaway, so basically if you only remember 4 things from today, I would just say, if you're already running your Selenium and your key user flows, we can just plug, and then you can plug in automated accessibility checks right there in the same pipeline. And then you can catch the important issues, accessibility issues, much earlier. So like what I said, don't bolt at accessibility issues at the end. And then you start with the common blockers that are objective and with high impact. And then use CI as a guardrail, not a full audit. And lastly, you should keep the human review for the new ones that basically the automation cannot judge. Bueno, muchísimas gracias a todos. Me ha encantado compartir esto con vosotros. Gracias.
Thank you. Any questions?
Nada?
No questions? Nada?
Bueno.
No hay? Okay, then.
Gracias.
Thank you. So, yeah, we're going to take a quick 5-minute break while people come upstairs, and then we're going to start the panel, okay?